So, heartiest salutations, people, and welcome to the Mission 91 discussion of Spy Family. So, Mission 91 came out about a week ago, and as always, I will leave a link to this mission that's currently being shown on the publisher's official website, Manga Plus, for free to the North American audience. So, if you're interested, we'll go take a look at it before they pull this mission back. Okay, so Mission 91 turns out to be yet another single chapter story. And it revolves mostly around characters that are outside of the three main characters of Lloyd, Anya, and Yor, although this story does revolve a bit around Yor. But it focuses mostly on yet another character that we typically don't see too much of in the main story. And for this one, it turns out to be Millie. Yes, Millie, the office worker who works with Yor at the government office. And compared to the other two characters of Camila and Sharon, Millie always turned out to be like that third wheel character who really didn't show any sort of depth. In fact, she kind of felt like a shallow character who was always happy-go-lucky and never really serious about anything. But I think Tatsuya Endo wrote this story specifically to give Millie a little bit more depth and to give us some understanding that she is a lot more than we have come to think about her over these past few chapters. And the story is quite interesting. It doesn't have any action, and it really doesn't involve Operation Strix, but it revolves around some very interesting points, namely about the casualties of war, as well as things like entitlement and virtue signaling. So I found this chapter to be quite interesting despite the fact that it really didn't fall into the main story at all. And the chapter begins with Anya and Yor going to the annual charity bazaar for the disabled veterans. And it's not really for personal interest that they're going there, but the fact that Yor, being an office worker, has to go there as part of her job. And that's why all the other co-workers appear in this chapter as well, including Millie. And when we start this chapter, we see Millie in her usual self, not wanting to do particularly any work and complaining all the time. And of course, the other characters like Camila and Sharon are kind of a little bit dumbfounded by her. And there's some very interesting comedic conversations that go on. But one of the most interesting things that I noticed with regards to this chapter is that Matthew, you remember Yor's handler from the garden? Or I'm not sure if he's the handler or just a co-agent, but he is now working at the government office as their boss. So it was quite interesting to see that. And he's basically telling them that they need to step up their work or they'll start being attacked by the Lady Patriot Society, which turns out to be a bunch of old ladies, I guess, who do a lot of community service. And what we find out is that it was that group that Yor met during that volleyball tournament that Melinda Desmond invited her to. You remember that group that she had tea with? Well, that turns out to be part of the Patriot Society. But in this chapter, it turns out to be a separate group of people. And it's interesting because during that tea party, the people who were in that society turned out to be very pleasant and gave Yor a very nice time. But the people who come out in this particular one seems to be very different. And if you remember, I mentioned that this chapter talks about entitlement, and that basically revolves around these people. Now, while that's happening, of course, this chapter does revolve around Millie. And why it does is because this is a disabled veterans bazaar. And you could see that she is reflecting upon something while she is looking at the disabled veterans that are participating in this bazaar. And she eventually says that she doesn't think that she can continue to work here. And though the wording does sound like yet another lazy attitude that Millie might have, the way her facial expressions seem to indicate that there's something beyond that's preventing her from being able to work here. And unfortunately, it's at that time that the Lady Patriot Society comes, and whether they overheard her or not, they start complaining about the fact that the office workers are being extremely lazy. And they emphasize the fact that this is a bazaar with regards to people who have risked their lives to save the country. and they should feel that they are obligated to work much harder. If you remember, I mentioned about virtue signaling. Well, it turns out that a lot of times entitlement and virtue signaling go hand in hand, and it's no different for this particular chapter as well. But what's interesting is when they talk about the disabled veterans and how they sacrifice themselves for that, the answer that comes back from Millie is a very surprising one. For she says, well, at least they're alive. Which sounds like a very tough statement to say, but as the conversations become more intense, she basically says that her father never made it through the war. He passed away during battle. And so, of course, she ends up, through that statement, becoming one of the victims of the war, a casualty of war, if you will. But once again, we're talking about entitlement and virtue signaling. And so the Lady Patriot Society starts accusing her of being rebellious against the good causes that they are making for the charitable contribution to the veterans. These people have suffered, and because of that, we all should be supporting each other to make a peaceful place, and how dare you not support us with regards to that? Which, of course, is a very hypocritical statement, considering she just mentioned that she lost her father and because of that becomes a victim of this war, and yet they seem to be attacking her rather than supporting her, which, of course, was obviously what Tatsuya Endo intended to show. And so, before things get really out of hand, Yor steps in and asks the question of why they're being so hard on her. And what's interesting is they start talking about entitlement. Just because she is a daughter of a deceased soldier doesn't mean that she should get any special treatment. She's a regular just like everybody else. And so Yor turns around and says, I understand. I also lost both parents during the war. And now I'm going to start working as hard as I can. And she shows them how she can lift 10 boxes all by herself. And she says, I expect that you will be doing this as well. To which, of course, the ladies from the Patriot Society say that there's no way that they can do that. And Yor questions, why not? And they answer, of course, we're not like you. And of course, then Yor comes back with, but I thought you said everybody is the same. If that's the case, then why are you judging Millie in a general manner as if she should be the same as everybody else when you do not judge yourself in that same manner? And so, of course, the Lady Patriot Society says, you're really stupid, aren't you? We're not talking about physical capability. We're talking about emotional capability, in which case Sharon does a very nice counter by saying, well, if it's emotional and if we're all supposed to be emotionally the same, then I guess the veterans who sacrifice themselves are in the same emotional happiness as all the other happy people in the city, in which case, why are we having this bazaar? You're contradicting yourself. And of course, at that point, the Ladies Patriot Society really gets angry and says, you have no idea. Your generation should be very grateful of our generation who experienced the war. And you, being children at that time, only had to receive the benefits of the victory that we got from the war. And so you should be grateful for us. And of course, Yor answers back, we are of course grateful for you. But to assume that the children have not been victims themselves, considering many of the children, including myself, had to grow up with absolutely no parents, it does not mean that the children were immune to the difficulties of the war. And by that time, of course, the head of the Lady Patriot Society group gets extremely mad. She snaps and she's about to strike Yor when we find out that Melinda has come to the bazaar incognito and she stops her. And thank God she stops her, because even if Yor didn't strike back, considering that Yor could probably kill her with one strike, if she had successfully slapped Yor, knowing how resilient Yor is, it probably would have been like slapping a rock, and she probably would have broken her hand doing so. So thank God that Millie stopped this lady before she could hurt herself by trying to attack Yor. And of course, now Millie recognizes Yor and starts becoming very friendly to her, and all the office workers are really surprised that Yor is a friend of Melinda Desmond. And everybody's a little bit not sure what to do, whether to admire Yor or not, with the exception of Millie, who is very now angry at Yor as well because she is a friend of Melinda Desmond, the wife of Donovan Desmond, the former prime minister of the country. And so she starts accusing her that her husband was the one who started the war, and how dare she come to such a bazaar considering the things that her husband has done. But it's at that point that Matthew corrects Millie and says that the war was not started by Donovan Desmond, but it was started by Chairman Chapman, the prime minister prior to Desmond, and Desmond had to take the blunt of the responsibility after Chapman stepped down. But with that said, Melinda does say that regardless of who started the war, as a member of the leading party during a good majority of the war, they do have to take responsibility for the war itself. And so she does understand with regards to why Millie is angry, and she does say that because she does have parents, have children, and of course has a husband, if any of them were to lose their lives to the war, she would be angry as well. And so she is very grateful, despite the difficulties and the pain that Millie is going through, that she is willing to come all the way out to the bazaar and try to support the people. And for that, she gives her personal thanks for her support. And I do like the comment that Melinda gives to the other members of the Patriot Society, saying that supporting each other isn't about judging somebody and about forcing them to be acting in a certain way, because if they do, then they would not have learned anything from the war and they would end up in the repression that they had in the past. And hearing this, Millie finally does say that she apologizes for what she said earlier, and she didn't realize that Melinda was such a person. And all Melinda does is respond back with a slight smile and leaves. And of course, the closing part revolves around Millie talking about her past and how this particular bazaar has always left her in pain. But for this year, she does feel that she has gained something with regards to being at the bazaar, and she does realize that it is most important to be with her friends, including Yor. And so this turns out to be a very nice chapter in not only showing a little bit of depth in Millie, but giving some understanding of the situations of society, as well as giving a little bit more glimpse into who Melinda Desmond is. Now, of course, everybody eventually comes back to realizing that Yor is a friend of Melinda Desmond, and Camila starts asking, how the heck were you able to do that? And it's not fair that you get to... it starts coming back to Camila being Camila again. And even Millie says that it's surprising that Yor can be so friendly and personal with Melinda and not having to bring out a posh exterior. To which, of course, Yor starts asking, what's a posh exterior? And so they're like, you don't even know what you're talking about. And so they start giving her a lesson on that. And the chapter ends with, Yor coming back with some very unusual greetings to the family. And so this was a very nice chapter. It wasn't very impactful, but many of these chapters that Tatsuya Endo does on the side often give a little bit more depth than even the action-packed chapters that we see in the major arcs, because it does give a chance for the author to give some of these scenarios and examples with regards to what society and people go through. And so I found this chapter to be very interesting, and it'll be interesting to see how the office workers and Melinda continue to develop as things go on. But we don't know what's going to happen in Chapter 92 because Chapter 91 it's completely self-contained. And we are getting to the point where we have had quite a few of these small single chapter stories. So I am thinking that maybe Tatsuya Endo will start coming to a new big arc soon, and maybe that will happen in the new year. And I am looking forward to seeing what happens in the next big arc. But this is the Chapter 91 discussion for Spy Family. If you read it, what'd you think about it? Any comments will be greatly appreciated. And until the next mission, happy manga reading, and as always, Jaya, nice day everyone.